StarCraft Ghost. And I was able to actually go in and help out with StarCraft 2 also, and some of the stuff on Diablo with some of the Diablo 3 with some of the lighting. So I know for a fact lighting is very intensive, and it's not something we take lightly. That's why I really don't teach you how to light your scenes in this class, but I do show you how to use the lights. Okay, now moving over here, this is where we can create cameras, like free cameras, just a camera that can be rotated in 3D space, or a target camera that can be selected, and then that camera would rotate and move around a selected targeted area. So if you had like a spaceship flying at you, you would lock the target onto the spaceship, and as the camera moved by, the camera would automatically follow the spaceship or airplane as it flew by. Then over here we actually have helpers where we can create dummies, crowds, exposures, points, protractors, compasses, grids, tapes. We can do all this fun stuff. Not so much you get into here, but especially animation students, this stuff's very helpful, because if you need to create a wall that is exactly 6 feet long, you actually have a tape measure that tells you how long you're actually doing it. This happens to be 6 feet 3 inches right there. Over here, this is where we actually create our forces, such as deflectors, reactor, particle effects, gravity. Like if I were to go ahead and take a vortex, drop it in here, let's just rotate it here, and I'll just do this. Now this is not something you're going to do in this class, but it is pretty cool to show. And then I'll create a particle effect, like I did earlier, like that super spray. And using that button that I showed earlier in an earlier video, bind to space warp, this is where I will actually bind that particle to this vortex, and watch what it does when I hit play. And you can do that with gravity, you can do it with wind, you can do that with binding, you can have it emit from a particle to where you could have a big hulking beast breathing and the particles emit on every exhale. That's what it's done. So even just more crazy with this, I could load the preset like I did earlier, like the fireworks. We can do things like this. Something that may be very interesting for your visual effects students, but it's also for doing visual effects for games. We do a lot of this stuff for games like this. Then we render it out. At this point it won't render because there's no textures or anything on it, but then we use those in video games as animated textures. So let's go over here. Alright, so back into this area. Now dealing more with the actual viewports, you notice we do have viewports and each one has its own little selection on it. You can click on these little plus signs, you can click on the words themselves, and they have a different meaning for each one. And they're very self-explanatory. Show viewport, show statistics. Each one is represented with its hotkey. The view cube, that's how you would turn it on, it's right there. You can actually do steering wheels, where you can actually set up a car, bind it to a piece of geometry, and then actually drive it with a plug-in steering wheel through your 3D space. Okay, 3D Max is the only program that can do that. And it's really good when you're doing virtual reality things, or let's say you're an architectural firm and you want to design something, and since I don't have anything plugged in, it won't do anything. But you can actually show your clients, look, you can go drive through the little area I created to show your model homes, or you could, let's say, even take it a step further and put a remote controlled car on a camera that's for a movie scene and have it bouncing all over your CG scene like a monster's chasing you. You could even have it look back and see the monster. All that stuff can be done right here in 3D Max. So then going back here, we can configure any of these. Now these menus here, you'll notice on each window, they do the same thing. But specifically, we're not here to work in 4-inch computer monitors. So if you want to click on these windows, you'll notice there's a little dark, it used to be a light yellow border, now it's a dark yellow border, and it shows you which window you have selected. So let's say in top view, I want to move around in top view. All I need to do is hold down my middle mouse button and move around, and it moves around this way. And it does the same with every window. If I just want to move around, that's just like panning the camera back and forth, back and forth. And it even works over here in perspective. Now I'm going to stay in perspective. I'm going to show everybody how to maximize this window to actually make it fill your screen. Now there's two ways to do it. There's actually a button for it way down here in the bottom right hand corner. It's the last button way down there, and it's called Maximize Viewport Toggle. And you click it and it does that. Whatever window you have selected, it will then maximize it. Or you can do what I like to do and just hit Alt W. Alt W is the hotkey to actually maximize whatever window you have selected. In that case, now we've all learned, just briefly, how to push the middle mouse button and move around this way in 3D space. But if you use the middle mouse button and hold down Alt, you're then able to rotate around 3D space. Now at this point, it may view as if the the 3D model is moving, but pay attention to the grid. The grid is actually staying centered, and we're moving ourselves in 3D space around it. So in conjunction with moving the object with middle mouse button only, or holding down Alt and using the middle mouse button, it actually rotates around. But we can also use like the mouse wheel to scroll in and out. And since it's 3D space that actually is infinite as the universe itself, we can actually scroll out to where we can't see our models on the screen anymore. And if this ever happens, there's a way where you don't have to click on anything to zoom back in. You can just hit Z, and it zooms in to whatever you have selected. In this case, I don't have the mesh selected, I have the camera selected. But let's say I have the guy selected and I select way out here and I hit Z. It zooms right in immediately on it. Okay? So that takes me to the components of each individual model. I'm going to go ahead and delete everything in the scene here and start from scratch. Clicking back over here to the Create tab, I'm going to go back up here to the actual primitives, and I'm going to move this up to standard primitives, and I'm just going to create a simple box. Now how to create any of these objects is you just click, drag your mouse, let go of your mouse, and click it again. Now by default, what I've created here is black because I have certain setups that are my personal preferences that were already in the scene, and I'm just going to hit M on my material editor, bring up the material, and I'm going to drag one of these spheres right onto the box. And there we go. Now, to view through what's called Wireframe Mode, is all you need to do is hit F3 on your keyboard, and you're actually able to see the mesh. If you hit F3 again, it shows the shaded view. If you hit F4, then it shows the edges on top of the mesh. And this is the most convenient way to work. I'd like to get everybody in the practice of using the mesh with the edge faces on so you can actually see where those edges are. I mean, you may guess it and go, well, I know where the edges are. They're right there. Well, you may have a cube that looks like this, and if you don't have edge faces on, can you see the edges? No, you can't. So by hitting F4, it turns them on. F3 does wireframe. Okay. Let's go ahead and bottom these out. Here's another interesting tip that I'll go ahead and give as a bonus here. Length segments, width segments, and height segments can all be zeroed out. You don't have to bother typing in a value or anything. You can just click on one of these arrows that are over here and drag your mouse back and forth, and it'll actually just kind of do it incrementally. And I like to keep everything just at 0. So to zero this, or excuse me, pushing it out to 1 is all you have to do is right click on these arrows and it puts it back to 1 automatically. All arrows in 3D Max do that. Alright, now at this point we cannot do anything with this mesh. We cannot edit it, we cannot take this box and transform it into a crate for ammunition, we can't make a car, I can't make a character's head, I can't make a sword, I can't make anything at this point. I have to now convert this thing to what's called an editable poly. That means it's a polygon model that is editable at its lowest level. Now to do that, it's very simple. With the object selected, I just right click and it pulls up this other menu called a hotbox. Now the hotbox enables me to, at the very bottom here, convert this to many different things. Editable mesh, editable poly, editable patch, convert to NURBS. Okay? But for the most part, here in the 21st century, we use editable poly. Okay? And I'll show why. Actually, you'll learn why over the weeks. So when I right click on this object, bring up the hotbox, convert to editable poly, just move over it and click it. It then changed over here that allows me to have access. Alright, so here with editable poly now, we can actually have access to the components of this 3D model. Now over here in the Modifiers List or the Dunbar, we actually have this thing that's called editable poly now. This represents the name of the object, which I could name anything. I wanted to name it Jimbo. That's the name of this box now, is Jimbo. Okay. This is the Modifiers List, which shows a bunch of fancy stuff that we're not going into on this lecture, of what we can do to this. But over here, more importantly, it says this is your editable poly. And up here there's a little black box with a little cross in it, or a little plus symbol, and that means it's a pull-down menu. Now here is where you can access the vertices. Now a vertice is just a single point in space where two lines converge. An edge, which is very self-explanatory, it's an edge. A border, which cannot be used on a flat object like a box, or a polygon. A polygon is these flat surfaces that exist all over these meshes. By holding down Control, we can actually select multiple polygons, and holding down Alt, we can deselect certain polygons. And an element represents the entire object. But a piece of terminology that's used, that I use specifically, is we do not use element mode to actually move objects. If you're going to move the object, whatever it may be you're creating, you have to go to object mode. Now the only way to get to object mode is two ways. Click on the word Editable Poly, or hit 6 on your keyboard. There's going to be times where I'm going to say, you need to go to object mode and move that over there, or do this, do this. I don't want to have to reiterate myself that clicking on the word Editable Poly goes to object mode, or hitting 6 on your keyboard goes to object mode. You've heard it. It's on this video. Live it, learn it, love it. Okay. So with doing that, I'm also going to create a sphere over here. That rhymes. I'm going to drag a gray material onto that also. I'm going to create a cone. I'm just going to create some basic shapes. Let's put a donut over here. A plane. No, it's not an airplane plane. And these are basic objects. Every object that exists in the world around you can be made from pretty much every single primitive shape in 3D Max. For example, if we were to make, let's say, a wall clock would essentially be a cylinder. A computer monitor would be a box. A cone, well, we can make a bunch of stuff out of cones. A sphere, a planet, a light bulb, this, a donut, or a cable hanging down from the ceiling, anything like that. A tube. Okay. These are basic primitive objects that we can edit. Okay. By converting them to Editable Poly, I have everything selected, convert to Editable Poly, multiple things selected, I can drag those onto them. Now these, being Editable Poly, now I have access to the vertices. I have multiple vertices selected, I can move this stuff around. Object mode, select the donut over here. I'm going to select the edges. You can move those around. They can be rotated. They can be manipulated in many, many ways. So that concludes this interface tutorial. So what I want everybody to do now is create specific objects.